Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I would like to run through my top 10 books of 2024, and I'll start obviously at 10 and work my way to the number one book of 2024. So as a year overall, it was a pretty good reading year for me, a little bit unusual in places, but generally positive. I read about 125 books. There's a couple that I need to sort of add in and check that I've got them written down, but I think it'll be about 125. And in my top 10, I've got 3 non-fiction, 5 modern fiction, no classics, surprisingly. Little Dorrit just didn't quite make it because I didn't love it as much as other Dickens's. That was probably the best classic that I read this year. Only 1 translated work of fiction, but surprisingly for me, 3 recent bookish prize winners. So that wasn't necessarily what I expected to find, but as I was going through the list, that was what I got to. So without further ado, I'll start at number 10, and 5 of these books I read, 5? Yeah. 6 of these books I read either as library books or ebooks, so I don't have them to do the waving around thing. So number 10 was Wilding by Isabella Tree, which was published in 2018. So this is a non-fiction book. I read it as an ebook as part of my offline reading group, which is based in an urban farm, so we are reading books about nature, sustainability, agriculture, land rights, all sorts of things. That has been a fantastic reading experience for me this year, and I might kind of review some of those books in more detail separately. But yeah, Wilding was the best of the ones that I read. It's of those books, I would say, on the whole, reading those books has completely changed the way that I look at the countryside, our food systems, our land systems, and the way that the British country works, I suppose, and this probably had the biggest impact for me. So that's like one of the reasons it's in my top 10 is for the impact on me as opposed to the quality of the book. It is a very good book. At times it strays into kind of lists of species a little bit. So it's here for the impact that it had on me. So Isabella Tree recounts her family's experiences stopping intensive agriculture and introducing groups of free-ranging herbivores into their large estate in Sussex, and the results in terms of endangered species reappearing and starting to flourish, biodiversity, and the changes that they saw sort of challenged the perceived wisdom of nature conservation. I found that beautiful, stunning, and I really would like to go and visit the Nep estate, which is where it's based. Book number 9 was Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. That was published in 2023. Again, that was an ebook, and I read it as part of my year of reading works of modern fiction with Roz from Scallydandling About the Books. Quite a few of the books that are in my top 10 came from that list. So this is a thrilling mystery story in which the narrator's dad goes missing, and the only witness is her brother, who is unable to speak due to his complex needs. It's a gripping story. I really could hardly put this down at all. But I think the ending, it was good, but it didn't kind of wrap it up quite as well as I wanted, and I wanted maybe another chapter more on the end, just to hear a little bit more of the repercussions of the result of the book. So yes, that's why it's number 9 and not higher up. Book number 8 is The Midwife's Tale by Nicky Leap and Billie Hunter, and that was published, I think it was reissued in 2014. I think it was actually previously published in like the early 90s. So that was a library book that I read as part of my mission to read everything that I could to understand labour and birth. The authors are both themselves midwives, and they interviewed women with experience of midwifery, whether as a mother or as a practitioner or as both, in a variety of contexts across the first half of the 20th century. So this is kind of qualitative research, but it wasn't, at the time that they were conducting it, it wasn't as formal as a modern qualitative research study. They write about that in their revised introduction about how research has come on so far since they were doing this. It can be hard to find like really good social history and really good women's history, and this really does both. It kind of captures a taste of what experiences would have been like for so many women throughout that period, both in formal healthcare and informal healthcare settings. And more than anything for me, it gave me confidence to think that actually women have been doing this and dealing with this for a very, very, very long time, and most of the time it does actually go okay. So yeah, the emotional impact that it had on me is another one that it bumps up the list for that as much as for the quality of the book itself. If you would be interested in hearing more about books that I read on the topic of pregnancy, labour and birth, just mention in the comments, because I've read a lot on that topic and I have a lot of thoughts related to it, and there was quite a broad range in what I read. So yeah, that's a potential whole separate video again. Book number 7 on the list was The 7 Moons of Maali, Almeida, and this is the first one that I'm able to weigh around. It's got an absolutely stunning cover. And this is by Shehan Karunarilaka, and it was published in 2022, and it won the Booker Prize of that year. I think I got this as a Christmas present last year from Roz, and it was one of the first books that I read in the year, and the fact that it stuck with me and still remains really vivid in my mind is probably one of the clues for why it's on this list. It's set during the Sri Lankan Civil War, and it follows a photographer who wakes up dead, and he has to work out what happened to him, as well as try to ensure that his life's work, which is a series of photographs that have the potential to have a bearing on the outcomes of the Civil War, is not lost or falling into the wrong hands. It's a fantastic take on a kind of World of the Dead type adventure experience. It's deadly serious in terms of covering the Civil War, but it also was quite fun and had moments of quite good humour. I would say maybe the second half wasn't quite as propulsive as the first half, but I really enjoyed the whole thing. Book number 6 on my list was the one work of translated fiction, and that was The Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Cespedes. This was, I keep mentioning Roz, this was Roz's copy, and she gave it to me once she'd finished it. I read this for Women in Translation Month in August. It was translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein, so published in 1952, but the translation I think was only last year. I'm not going to check, but last couple of years at least. So this purports to be the secret diary of an Italian housewife and mother to 2 grown-up children who all live together in the same flat. It's so simple but so powerful. The writing of the diary helps the narrator Valeria to realise how tight the boundaries of her own world are. She lives in Naples. All she wants to do is to go to Venice, to have a trip to Venice. But she just can't seem to get there, or get any space at all to herself. It's emotionally very powerful, and just beautiful. Book number 5 then is another non-fiction, and that is What Jane Austen's Characters Read and Why by Susan Allen Ford, and this is from this year, 2024. I bought this in Mr. B's Books in Bath, I believe, in July, for Jane Austen July, and it's one of only 4 books that I bought for myself this year. I bought various books for family members and so on, but 4 books that I bought brand new for myself, this was one of them. And I read all of them actually. So in terms of booktube, book buying bans and physical TBRs, I didn't do too badly this year. I did add a lot of books to my collection, but they were mostly picture books. I think, yeah, maybe small booktube miracle, only buying 4 books for myself. Okay, as someone who loves Jane Austen, possibly a little bit too much, and has spent quite a lot of time reading the books that her characters read. I've read things like The Mysteries of Udolpho, Lover's Vows, things like that. This book was a dream come true for me. Ford analyses why each book would have been mentioned, what it would have meant to readers at the time, what Jane Austen might have been trying to say with it, and in general just allowed me to see books that I love in a slightly new light and to understand the context of Austen's writing a little bit more. Book number 4 then is a foray into fantasy, and that is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is the book 1 of the Farseer series, and it was published in 1995. My husband has been recommending these books to me for years, literally years. He's a very big fan and has been for a long time. And I always knew that I would probably like them because we have quite similar tastes in books, particularly fantasy books, but actually most books. But I just wasn't in the market for a really long, dense fantasy series. I mean, this is the shortest one, but the others are quite a lot thicker, and I think there's about 16 books in total at the moment. A few trilogies and one that's got 4. This year I decided, it's kind of now or never. I took the plunge. I was listening to this as an audiobook. I'm already on to the second book now. I'm so glad that I went for it. The storytelling is just marvellous. It follows a young boy from the day that he first discovers that he is the bastard son to the king in waiting, this book covers up to the first major assignment that he has as a trainee assassin. And it's not a spoiler, it's the literal title of the book. It's a classic medieval setting with a sprinkling of magic and the threat of the ominous Red Ship raiders. It's just really well constructed world and setting, and just really drew me in. It's not just the best fantasy that I read in 2024, and I read some pretty good fantasy in 2024, I would say. It could be one of the best fantasy books that I have ever read, but we'll see how the rest of the series pans out. Okay, so book number 3, so we're getting into the top 3 now, was Western Lane by Chetna Maroo, and that was published in 2023. That was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in that year. I read that on Kindle for my modern fiction project with Roz again. And this book follows a young woman, or old girl, I suppose. She's kind of in early adolescence, Gopi, as she and her family live through the first years after her mother's death. She spends a lot of her life in that time on the squash court, training relentlessly under her dad's supervision. But it's not really about the squash at all. It's about coming of age, sisterhood, and bereavement. It's such a short book. I think it's actually kind of a novella, but it's so perfect, and just really, moving but not overdone. Book number 2 on the list, and these were actually really close. The 3 and the 2 could easily have been flipped around. Was Milkman by Anna Burns. That came out in 2018, and it was a Booker Prize winner in that year. I read this one on the Kindle. I know that everyone was reading it and raving about it back in 2018 when it came out, but I missed the bandwagon then, and this time I was just out of Wi-Fi looking for something to read, and it was one of the things that was already downloaded onto the Kindle. So I was actually choosing between a couple of different things. I thought, I'll read the first page of a few different books and decide which one to go for. I read the first page and I was completely blown away, swept up in the story, didn't want to even consider reading anything else. It's a stream of consciousness thriller set during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. The narrator is trying to mind her own business when she attracts the attention of the sinister, notorious Milkman. It's about a community in conflict, which actually is the main theme of the next book that I'm going to mention, so maybe that's a theme. It was great. I'm glad I finally read it. And finally, book number 1, my favourite book that I read this year, and the one that really sticks with me for 2024, was Brotherless Night by Vivi Ganeshananthan, and that was the Women's Prize winner this year when it came out in 2024. Again, that was an ebook. Again, I read it with Roz for our modern fiction project. And in this story, we follow a young woman as her family get dragged into the escalating Sri Lankan civil war. So 2 books on this list set during the Sri Lankan civil war, something that I knew nothing about basically before the start of this year. It's a story about how communities fall apart, what makes an action, a person, or a cause morally good or bad. It's about loyalty and love. It was so vivid that sometimes when I'm thinking about it, I think that it was a memoir, because it's told in the first person, as she recounts, how things happened the way they did, and where it has taken her life now. It was emotionally complex, vibrant, just beautifully written, and I'm so glad that I read it. I've recommended it to several people already. I would say it's a war story. Be aware that it's going to be in places true to that context, I suppose. But yeah, definitely easily takes top spot. So what have I learned overall about my reading this year? I suppose that I need to not dismiss modern fiction. the reason that we started this reading one book a month together modern fiction project was because I read a lot less modern fiction and I tend to think that it's not really for me. I also need to stop dismissing prize-winning books because I've always felt that, you know, a book that wins the Booker, it's probably not really my cup of tea. Well, that's clearly not the case based on the books that I've read this year, the books that I particularly liked this year. Actually, maybe I need to get my hands on Orbital and start enjoying that. I have enjoyed a lot of non-fiction this year. Female authors, I don't think that's a surprise to me. 9 out of the 10 authors on this list were women, and female protagonists or points of view have also featured prominently. So maybe that's something that I need to try and sort of balance out. Another feature that I noticed from this list is that I'm probably reading more diversely. A lot of the books or the characters involve sort of experiences of migration or are set outside of the UK. So that's, yeah, something that was a feature this year. I think looking back on my reading from 2023, I remember at the end of the year being surprised by how undiverse my reading was in 2023, and there were various reasons for that, which I could go into, but I'll not. But yeah, this year I think I have enjoyed the experience of my reading horizons being a bit broader. I'm going to be carrying that on into 2025. I'm going to be trying my best to participate as much as possible in the Reading the Globe readathon of translated fiction, CircumNavi, which is also covering translated fiction. So that's... CircumNavi is Rebecca Nicole, I think, and Reading Around the Globe is Katja and various other co-hosts. I will link those readathon announcements in the description. And yeah, I'm just going to see where 2025 takes me. And I hope that I'll read some more classics that I love in 2025, because I'm almost a little bit sad that I didn't read a classic this year that was good enough to make it onto the list, unless you would count The Forbidden Notebook, because obviously it's a modern classic in Italy. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and let me know if any of these were a favourite for you, or if you have any recommendations for me based on these successes, and yeah, any thoughts at all. Okay, take care, Merry Christmas.